Well, welcome to the Impactus podcast. I'm Dean Brenton, and we are here to equip you for a life of purpose and godly impact. I am so delighted to be sharing this podcast with a new friend of this ministry, new friend of mine. Sathiya Sam is a coach and speaker who helps men live with confidence and integrity. He's a recovered addict himself, the creator of DeepClean, a research-based and Bible-backed system for overcoming porn addiction. DeepClean has helped everyone from college students to medical doctors regain control of their lives and walk in greater levels of freedom. He's married to his lovely wife, Shaloma, and they are based out of Toronto, Canada. So thank you, Sathiya, for joining us today. It is so good to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me here, Dean. And the pleasure was all mine. I got to interview you on my podcast. It was fantastic, and I'm glad that I get to return the favor here. It's really fun.
I know we got to reciprocate the favor, and really looking forward to this conversation today. So thanks for being a part of this.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So let's start with the first obvious question. Tell us who you are, your faith background, family background. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I reference myself as a fourth generation pastor. So my dad, my granddad, and my great granddad were all pastors. And even before them, we actually found out recently there was a conversion, I think at the fifth generation back from Hinduism to Christianity. But prior to the conversion, it was all Hindu faith leaders. So faith leadership just goes way back in the lineage. And I had ambitions to become a psychiatrist and get into medicine and stuff like that. But the roots just run way too deep. Ministry was kind of coursing through my veins, and I didn't even know it. So, my background is I grew up in a really, honestly, a good pastor's home. Not just good on the outside, but my dad was the same person off the stage. I was very fortunate that way. And the house was a safe place. My parents shelled out the cash for us to get a Christian education, and we had really good lives. And for me, it was a lifelong journey of kind of figuring out where's my calling, where do I fit in. And like I mentioned, it was when I started pursuing psychiatry. I studied very hard in university, tried to get good grades and volunteer, and just a really well-rounded kind of CV for when the application time came. And when it did come, is also when I committed my life to Jesus. Not that I hadn't before, but at some point the baton gets handed off. And that was the season for me where it was like, okay, I really want to live for God. I want to serve Him. And in that process, I could feel this thing about ministry kind of rising in my heart, the thing that I told myself I would never do because I didn't want to be like my dad. But I did kind of submit to the call of God on my life and said yes. And that's looked like worship leading. I was a recording artist for a while, a Christian recording artist, worship leader. I mentioned that. I pastored a local church. And most recently, as you mentioned in the introduction, I run DeepClean now, and I help guys get free of pornography.
That is so cool. You and I have a little bit of a similar background. My grandfather was a pastor as well, and I said for years I will never be a pastor.
Yeah.
And guess what happened? And so I'm very familiar with that ministry background, and it's some people struggle with that, and it sometimes even turns them away from the faith. But for me, and I mean for you as well, it seemed like it was really formative in your early development as a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, I'm super grateful. I mean, it's I think it's one thing when you go to Sunday school or you go to church or whatever, and you see these things, even going to a Christian school, like you see it to a certain extent. But when the values are modeled at home, not just in the way my parents were, but the way they treated each other, the way they parented us, they really exuded the character of Christ. And so even though I would say I did hit I had a bit of a bumpy patch before I really committed my life to Jesus, because I was studying the sciences and I was in a totally atheistic environment where the idea of God is totally mocked, and you can never be foolish enough to actually believe in that stuff, And that was where I think the rubber hit the road for me. And initially, kind of a bumpy way, yeah, why do I believe what I believe? It caused me to dig deeper. But in it, I found God. He really worked it for good. And I think having that foundation laid from my upbringing and my parents and everything else, it certainly gave me a leg up when I did commit my life to Jesus, and certainly when I said yes to full-time ministry.
It's pretty cool that, at a time in your life when it probably would have been when challenged, your faith being challenged, or at least your upbringing being challenged, that instead of turning you away from the faith, it actually kind of pointed you back in and reaffirm some of the things that you had learned growing up as a child. That's pretty
Yeah.
neat.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not the topic of the podcast today, but I think a lot of people pit science and religion against each other, or science and faith. But the reality is, science at its best is just discovering God's creation, and the two beautifully intermingle. And that was the case for me. It was like the more I got into science and microbiology and genetics and neurology, and you're seeing how all these things work together. It's like it's almost undeniable. It kind of boggles the mind that so many people could be studying these things and not acknowledge the divine in it. And like I said, it's another subject for another day. But but for me, they really interplayed quite well, and one ultimately gave rise to the other.
No, that's great. I just love that narrative of how you, in the face of university and questions and that kind of environment, that you actually rediscovered faith and found Jesus in the midst of that. Now, you had an interesting childhood, and as I read your story, at age 11, you had your first kind of taste of what pornography was, that eventually led you into what you describe as a real addiction.
Yeah.
So how did that happen, and how did you transition from that into being free from that kind of addiction?
Yeah, I mean, it almost probably sounds like a bit of a juxtaposition there, because I'm talking about how great my upbringing was, and then at 11 years old here, I'm getting exposed to porn. And this was in 2001, so this is kind of before the digital revolution and the spread of smart devices and everything else. But I was in the computer lab of my Christian school. One of my classmates said, "Hey, my soccer buddy told me to check out this website." Very innocent sounding URL, and we typed it in. And I honestly, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. I just kind of knew it was bad. He knew exactly what it was. And again, I don't think it was malicious, but he immediately put his hands on the screen kind of thing, to cover up what was going on. And it was a bit of a confusing moment, because like I said, I had never seen anything like that before. I didn't even really know it existed. But I just knew that it was bad. It was wrong. His response alone said that, in addition, of course, the content itself. But I was just on the cusp of puberty. I actually skipped a grade. So at that stage, all my friends who were a year older than me, I think they had all hit puberty and were probably way further along their sexual kind of discovery and exploration than I was. But just on the cusp of it. And when I did start to develop sexually, that experience of pornography was always there, kind of just lingering. And so it wasn't like it was this instant, I was hooked, I went home, I watched it again that night. I actually resisted it, because I thought it was so weird and so kind of dirty. There was this weird feeling to it. But eventually I kind of went back to it, and it was just a gradual, bit by bit. In high school, it was pretty regular. By the time I was in university studying so hard, porn was kind of my medicine to cope with the stress and the pressures. And it was also my reward after, a 14, 15-hour day at university of studying and working in the labs and everything else. And that would be the point in my life where I would say I was really addicted, and I had no way out.
You made a comment a few moments ago that this was pre-smartphone, ready access. Now, I'm old enough to remember, pornography was something that was on a magazine shelf.
Yeah.
So I'm really dating myself now. But how has the digital revolution, the rise of smartphones and that kind of technology accentuated this kind of addiction?
Yeah, I'm really glad you used that word, because I think some people say, oh, it's because of the digital revolution that porn is such a problem. But the reality is that we know the issues of the heart have been around for centuries, for millennia. Jesus was talking about this 2,000 years ago, and so were the scriptures even before Jesus. But I think the digital revolution has really it's given the accessibility a whole nother meaning. Now, in addition to porn being accessible, it's also affordable. You can get free content basically anywhere, and it's also anonymous. Right? So somebody with a smartphone in the comforts of their own bedroom is able to access this stuff. And those three things collectively are a result of the digital age, and they are what's making pornography such a destructive force in our society today.
That's so true. How did you start to make your way toward freedom from this addiction?
Yeah, that was really the crux of the story here, because I think here I've graduated university. I've committed my life to Jesus. I know that in committing your life to Jesus, you clean things up. You repent. You ask for forgiveness. You change the way you were living before. So for me, that meant not drinking irresponsibly on the weekends. It meant cleaning up my language, and it meant getting rid of porn. So yeah, drinking responsibly, no problem at all. I basically stopped drinking, and that wasn't an issue. Cleaning up my language, again, not a big deal. Maybe a couple weeks, I don't know, a couple months. Porn was just this thing that I could not shake. And I think what I realized, like I had tried some things along the way, because even before I sort of had this come to Jesus moment, I didn't like having porn as part of my life. So I had tried internet filters, and I had some accountability partners and stuff as well. But the accountability systems that I used were very broken. Either I was very reactive about it. So it's like, hey, I messed up, pray for me. Very after the math, or after the fact rather. Or my accountability partner was somebody who was struggling themselves, and it was kind of the blind leading the blind. At least that was my experience of it. So those are my initial solutions. And I think I just realized, especially when I really committed my life to Christ, that those things I was very grateful for, but I needed something deeper. I needed something more than that. And around the same time is when I really started to learn about the impact of the gospel on the emotional health of a person, on the mental health of a person. And I realized that a lot of what was driving my porn viewership were, feelings of disconnection, feelings of not being good enough, fears of rejection. Those were the kinds of things that really drove me there. And I think when I pinpointed that and realized, oh, this is actually where the issue is, then I was able to be a little bit more proactive in my solutions and ultimately resolve it at a root level. And in doing so, then I would say my drive for pornography diminished significantly as a result.
That's good. You make this statement on your website. You say that resolving heart issues was the key to freedom. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, for sure. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a guy, he's, I don't know, he's in his 30s, in his 40s. He's married, he's got a couple kids, and he's starting to climb the ranks at his work. So he's got a long day, and he's supposed to hit a deadline at 5 o'clock that day. And the boss says, hey, like, if you don't hit this deadline, like, da 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 da, here are all the repercussions. We need you to hit it. And he's realizing that actually he's in over his head and he's not going to hit it. So he just has a big stressful day. He ends up working till about 6 o'clock, and he does manage to get it done, just, an hour past the deadline, whatever. So he comes home. He's barely decompressed by the time he gets into the house. His wife greets him with a smile, happy to see him. Hey, hey, sweetheart, we made dinner. Why don't you come eat with the kids? So he eats dinner, plays with the kids a little bit, goes on the couch, flicks on the TV. Wife puts the kids down. And later, it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. She says, hey, I'm going to go read for a bit and then probably go to bed. You want to come join me? And he says, no, that's okay. I'll join you in a little bit. And, one thing leads to another. He's scrolling his phone late at night, stays up a bit later than he thought. But, he figures like, I had a hard day. I've earned it. And one thing leads to another, and he ends up watching porn. And so he goes to bed. He feels so ashamed, and he wakes up the next day knowing he has to deal with it. And we often will reflect back on an experience like that and say, oh, it's really too bad. He should have gone to bed when he had the chance. But actually, what he should have done is learn how to deal with his stress. And that is the whole essence of resolving root issues. It's that sometimes the behavior, the challenging behavior, is really just the presenting issue. It's the tip of the iceberg. But if you want to move that thing collectively, all together, permanently, you actually have to get underneath the surface. You have to figure out what are the things that are really driving this behavior to begin with. If that guy has coping mechanisms for his high stress job, there's a much better chance that after a long day at work, even if he's stressing about deadlines, he's going to be able to manage himself in a better way and make better decisions. Now that's I would say it's still more of a superficial example, but that's an example just of what it looks like to resolve heart issues. We find when you really dig underneath the surface, there's often a lot of issues that are more emotional in nature. It's a fear of rejection. It's a fear of disconnection. It's feelings of neglect, lack of intimacy. It's those kinds of things that often are driving the behavior.
Yeah, it's the thing beneath the thing, to quote Steve Carter, who's written a book by that title.
Yes.
It's the things underneath the surface that you've got to get down to get to the solution or the freedom that really we want to find. Now, you mentioned in that example, the guy who's married. So I've come across guys who said, and who've had addictions to pornography, but they live under the assumption that when they get marriage will change everything and the addiction will be no more. Now, you make a statement that marriage is a magnifier. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, great question. So we were just talking about this on my podcast recently. Actually, there's four magnifiers in life: time, authority, money, and marriage. And when I say the word magnifier, what I mean is that these are things we often think will fix our issues in life, when in reality they expose them. And marriage is maybe the pinnacle of it all because it's just so relationally charged. But it's a very common misnomer that, yes, I have all this pent up sexual energy. That's why I struggle with porn. But of course, once I'm married, and this is of course a Christian dogma, once I'm married and I'm able to have sex on a regular basis, that pent up energy is resolved. It has a channel and an outlet. Therefore, my desire for porn will dissipate. And I think this is, again, it's actually very symptomatic of that thing I was talking about earlier, where we try to solve behavioral issues with a behavioral solution like an internet filter or willpower, that kind of thing, not realizing there's deeper seated issues that are driving this. And all of those things get exposed in marriage. So a lot of the guys who come to me, Dean, they got married, and actually they did fine for a while because, of course, we know there's kind of that honeymoon phase early on in marriage, and it's all daisies and roses. And, you have your conflicts and whatever. It's not such a big deal. But then it's that first major life transition. It's when they finally bought a house, or when they had their first kid, or whatever it is, that first major life transition or that first big fight, whatever it is, that seems to be what kind of catalyzes this chain reaction that eventually leads back to porn consumption. All that old wiring is still there. And ultimately, the old issues were not resolved. They just simply went dormant for a while. So I think it's a huge lie to believe that marriage fixes those problems. It really just exposes it. Everything's on a bigger stage once you're in a covenant with another person.
That's really insightful, really powerful reality. That and it goes back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago. That it's the heart issues. It's the Bible says the heart is the wellspring of life, and if we don't deal with the heart issues, the old wiring is still there. You've got to deal with the wiring that's there. You've got to replace that wiring, as it were. Now you've found a way, or you've developed a way to replace the wiring, and you've called it, and you've created a program called DeepClean. So, what is DeepClean, and how did you come up with that? How does it work?
Yeah, so DeepClean was birthed out of my own struggle. So when I was really struggling and seeking resources, there was not a lot out there. Now, granted, we were not in the day and age of podcasts. I think we're a lot more blessed these days to have more resources at our fingertips, but it doesn't change the fact that the subject of porn and sexuality are stigmatized issues, and people are hesitant to go there. So when I struggled, I made this little kind of vow in my heart that one day I would get free, and I would help as many other people as possible get free as well. So for me, February 2016 was the last time that I viewed porn or gratified in any kind of way. That means it's been about 5.5 years now. And I waited about 2.5 years before I kind of started to do anything on my own. It was always burning in my heart. And I felt like I had a specific revelation from God as well that was kind of based on my science background, my study of scripture. As I mentioned, I studied and eventually became a local church pastor, and then my own experience. So I was sitting on this revelation and letting it percolate a little bit, like a good cup of coffee. It's gotta sit for a little bit. But eventually I kind of felt the release from God and decided to move forward with it and launch DeepClean. So the basic premise of DeepClean is threefold. It's that if you cultivate self-awareness, if you recover from wounds of the past, and if you form a godly identity, your heart experiences such a deep degree of transformation that the problematic behaviors around porn and lust and everything else take care of themselves. So that's the DeepClean methodology. Right now it looks like course material, it looks like steady community, and regular coaching. And we believe that those three things all together with kind of the pillars that God has given us to really focus on make for a very dynamic impact in a guy's life, not just to get him free of porn, but to help him stay free long term.
That's so good. I love the three pillars you've created the program. But now I know it's more than a program for you. It's also opened up other opportunities for you to participate in ministry, and tell us about some of those opportunities and what God's been opening, the doors He's been opening for you.
Yeah, well, it's been amazing because I think as much as it's a stigmatized issue, people do actually want to talk about this. And I've just decided to be the sacrificial lamb about it and stick my neck out a little bit. So I think God honors those risks. I've had the chance to share about Deep Clean on Huntley Street, on 700 Club, on a show called See, Hear, Love as well. So some of the big Crossroads shows. But I'm interviewing on podcasts on a regular basis as well, probably 3-4 times a week. And I have a book coming out probably by the end of 2021, maybe beginning of 2022. Still ironing out the release date there. We're getting very, very close now. The cover's about to be finalized. So that's very exciting. And I think those are some of the things that I'm really proud of because it's at each step, I think, just shows more and more that there is actually need for this, and that if you step out and you take a risk and you share your story, people respond and God rewards it. So those are some of the things that we've been up to here at Deep Clean.
That's so good. I love how God's been using your story, and it's really true, right? When you take those steps of faith, you be the sacrificial lamb, as it were. It's not wasted. God uses that, and just uses that kind of story because it's a real story and it's a real issue, and it is way more prevalent, I think, than we realize. And so, thank you for what you do. Thank you for the message that God has given you and being faithful to deliver it. Andrew Thompson, who's our national worship leader, first connected us, and I love how God is knitting together ministries and providing cross seeding, with different organizations, because we're all in this for the same reason. We want to see guys be free and live a full life for Jesus. Yeah. So for the guy who's listening today who is trapped by some level of addiction with pornography, where's a good place to start?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. The reality is there's going to be a very small percentage of guys who are listening probably who say, Sathiya, I'm ready. Like enough is enough. I've had it. I'm ready for a program. I'm ready for something committal. So if that's you, you can go to my website, getadeepclean.com, and you can book a strategy session with me. And that's kind of where we go through the process to just hear your story and figure out what's going to be the right fit for you. A larger percentage of people listening are probably more in the camp of, okay, I might need to explore this a little bit more. I don't think I'm ready for a program. And if that's you, there's two ways that people can get plugged in. One is they can listen to our podcast. That's a weekday podcast where we offer content about the kind of subjects you and I have discussed, Dean. And then I've recently released the Ultimate Recovery Guide to Porn Addiction. And those are some of my best practices for guys who are struggling, who just want to get started on the journey. And they're honestly the things I swear by. They're things that I started when I got free, and they're the things I still do today to stay free rather. And they're the things that we teach our guys to get free as well. So that's available at ultimaterecoveryguide.com. So one of those two ways are probably a good way to get plugged into the ministry here.
That's great. Looking forward to your book when it gets released as well. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it. And one of the things I wanted to say earlier, Dean, is I think one of the amazing byproducts about this that I guess I didn't know this was part of doing the ministry I'm doing, but it's just been meeting you and people like you who are doing incredible work, who are visionaries and pioneers and really doing everything they can to disciple men. And I just feel like, when you look at even the demographics, it's funny, like launching a book, you look at Christian readership and a majority of it is women. And you look at the small groups at your church and a majority of it is women. And, I think women have been better traditionally at probably reaching out and getting help and whatever else. But it doesn't change the fact that men need help too. And I'm so humbled, honestly, to be on the podcast here. I've looked up to Promise Keepers, Impactus for decades now, and I love what you guys are doing. It's a real privilege. So it's fun to kind of run alongside you guys, and thanks again for having me. This has been really cool.
Well, we're on parallel tracks, and there's no coincidence, obviously, that God has aligned our paths to have some common conversations. I think it's really cool what He is doing. So you mentioned the guy who may be addicted and acknowledges that. How about the guy who's a bit of a skeptic and says, "Oh, it's not really an addiction. I just watch a little bit here or there." What do you say to that guy who probably is a little more unaware of the danger of pornography?
Yeah, I would probably ask, what do you have to gain from it? And I think usually when you answer that question, it's pretty telling of why you're doing it. I had a conversation with a guy yesterday, actually. I spoke at a church, and he had said, watching porn only affects me. So if it's not hurting anybody else, what's the big deal? But it's a huge misnomer. I mean, without even talking about any other relationships he has, what happens behind the camera is honestly, it's disgusting. Because in addition to the porn content itself, I mean, most of these things are filmed under really dire conditions. These are people who are struggling to make ends meet, and they're being exploited. And if you think that watching is only affecting you, you're sorely mistaken. But I think beyond that, porn is showing, like the research is showing now, that porn affects your capacity for intimacy. It affects sexual performance. And in general, it affects your overall perception or outlook on life. So the research is very clear that it does negatively rewire your brain. And I think the world at large is hesitant to kind of accept that as a reality. There's several reasons for it, but I think it doesn't change the fact that people are clearly being affected. Now that's on a research side, but anecdotally as well. I mean, I'm seeing people all the time who told themselves, yeah, it's not such a big deal. But then once crisis comes and they need something to medicate, once they go through a breakup and they no longer have that intimacy and their heart is longing for that, you're going to go and drift towards the options that are the most convenient. And it's almost always pornography or something like it. So you're a ticking time bomb if you think you can just watch a little bit here and there and it be okay, because you don't know when those moments are going to come. Porn will sink its grips one way or another.
That's really profound. What do you say to the guy who feels God nudging them because they want to step out like you have, and they, want to step out in some avenue of ministry, but they feel, their story may actually be something that God couldn't use, or their background, or whatever reason. What do you say for the guy who feels they should step out to make some kind of a difference in life or work or ministry? What encouragement would you give to them?
Yeah, when guys get on a strategy call with me, one of the questions I love to ask them is, what does your porn-free life look like? And it's amazing to hear, what comes out, because most guys have big dreams and very sincere hearts. And probably the most common answer I get is that they want to help other guys get free as well. It is honestly one of the most common driving factors. So I think it's twofold. If you want to help somebody in this area, you have to start obviously pursuing freedom for yourself. And let it be the thing that drives you, that motivates you on those hard days. Remember all the guys that you're going to set free one day, on those days when it's really hard and when the temptation's high, But I think beyond that, whether it's you want to help in this area or something on a broader scale, you just have to start somewhere. I didn't get free until I was 26, but I was probably talking about this with friends and stuff when I was 22, 23. Again, I wasn't starting a ministry and pretending I had it all together, but I was at least starting the conversation. I was curious and I was learning, and I was doing the little parts that I could, even while I still struggled. And I think those little steps go a long way. They kind of prepare you when the time does come, and God sees them as well. And he really does reward those little steps. James says that faith without action is dead. And I like to say that faith with action is deadly. And I think even if it's just small little steps, God honors that. He really does. And it's just amazing. It's amazing where he'll take it.
That's so good. Faith with works is deadly. I like it. I like it a lot. And as I've heard preachers say, it kind of becomes cliche, but God really does specialize in taking the mess of our lives and turning it into a message. And he's certainly done that with you. And so I thank you for sharing your message. Thank you for the work you're doing. How can people keep up with you or find out more about what you're doing and Deep Clean? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so getADeepClean.com. That's probably that's our hub website. That'll get you access to our podcast. We have a weekly newsletter and the Ultimate Recovery Guide. You'll get a pop-up about that as well if you'd like. And for those guys who are a little bit more serious and looking for a program, you can book a strategy call there as well. It's getADeepClean.com. Fantastic.
Thank you, Sathiya, for joining us today. It's been so good. I look forward to your book release, and I look forward to many more conversations ahead.
Well, thanks for having me, Dean. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.